Hello and welcome to Misaal. My name is Zahed and I'm your host. On this podcast, I talk candidly with the most innovative minds working towards building a better startup economy in Pakistan. In this episode of the Misaal podcast, I invite you to listen in on my conversation with Raza Matin. He is the founder and CEO of Brandverse, an e-commerce enablement company based in Karachi. Brandverse's newest product, Chikoo, simplifies the process of launching an e-commerce store for offline businesses. Our conversation covers a broad range of topics such as building Chikoo to help businesses get online, why helping businesses get online is a problem worth solving, unfair advantages and surprising use cases, building and retaining talent through a high-performance culture, challenges and opportunities in the payments ecosystem, and the startup ecosystem in Pakistan, funding and opportunities. Let's listen in. Thank you, Raza, for being on the Misaal podcast. How are you?
Doing very well, thank you. And thanks for having me here.
So how does it feel to be back in Purana Pakistan?
Feels a lot like Naya Pakistan. So no comment.
Okay, has the whole everything that was happening, has it died down a little bit, or is it still in full swing?
Look, Pakistan, the people here are the stoic bunch. We see this every couple of years. The government comes, the government goes. So nothing really changes. We continue to push ahead and hope for the best. I mean, if nothing, we are a very optimistic bunch.
Okay. Well, you are certainly very optimistic. So a little background about how I heard about you. So this was very interesting. I found about you on Twitter. And as you know, you are quite active on Twitter. I was also very active on Twitter, so that's how I heard about you. And then I realized, you're part of. You created Brandverse, and now you're working on Chikoo. So that's how I know about you. So since Twitter is in the news these days, I want to get your thoughts on what do you think about Elon Musk buying Twitter.
I think it's going to raise a lot of questions about independence and sort of freedom of speech, and the limits to which you can sort of stretch this out. It also, like everything else and like everywhere else, I think the, largesse is questioned, right? So whether you're too large, do you become a monopoly, etc. And I think Elon is inviting a lot of those questions on himself through a lot of these sort of high-profile moves. But more power to him. If he can buy your own social network instead of building one, why not?
Yeah, I mean, because I know, I remember he tweeted, he had a poll too, where he asked people what he thinks, what people think about, if there should be a social network and things like that. So it was really strange the way things turned out. I personally don't have an opinion per se, but I feel like it's going to be good because I've always felt that Twitter might be a better private company than it is a public company. A public company has to come out with forward-looking statements every single quarter, make sure that Wall Street is happy, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that all goes away and Twitter can focus on the product that they keep, neglecting, I feel. I really don't think much has happened at Twitter in the past few years. So I really hope things get better from the product standpoint.
Yeah, I think the product is largely been neglected. They keep playing catch up. Spaces is a great example of that, sort of popped up after Clubhouse. And I think, Twitter's been working on a lot of things and they don't always make it up to market on time. And I'm not sure why there is this sort of stagnancy there. Hopefully having someone at the helm like Elon will accelerate this. And, I think Twitter definitely has, it's a very, I don't even want to call it a niche. I think it's got a very specific use case, which none of the other social networks sort of broach. So I think it's great in the sense that it's very, very open.
Yeah. It's kind of like the pulse of the world, right? Like you can go on Twitter and find out what's happening all over the world. In any case, okay. So the reason I wanted to have you on the Misaal podcast is because you are working on Chikoo. So can you tell me more about what you have been building with Chikoo?
Chikoo is more than just helping businesses come online. I think we're the product's sort of evolving as we better understand the needs of businesses in sort of our markets. And when I say our markets, I sort of mean the other billion markets. The markets that have been largely ignored. and they haven't been solutioned for. So, at the heart of Chikoo, yes, we start off by being a solution that very quickly brings small businesses online, which means they are able to sort of solve for discovery, but then they're also able to solve for e-commerce in a way that's very, very intuitive and within grasp of the capabilities and capacities of small business owners in markets like Pakistan, Nepal, Africa, etc. So the idea was, can you create sort of, it's not to make another version of Shopify, but it's to create a solution that feels very native in the hands of small business owners in our markets, whose context differs greatly from someone who's sitting in Europe or the US or sort of slightly more developed markets, where access to, for example, credit cards is easy enough. And most of those folks have basic computing knowledge and training, which our sellers don't. So our goal with Chikoo was, can we build a better on-ramp for e-commerce? And obviously a lot of that was driven by the onset of COVID and a lot of businesses really suffering and shutting down. In terms of where it's headed, it's becoming a lot more small business management solution. So as we sort of went down this journey of sort of exploring the needs of small business, what we realized is whether that business owner or that small businesses in the US, the UK, Europe or Pakistan, or for that matter, Africa or Thailand, they all share the same aspiration, right? They all want to grow. They all want to increase their economic worth. They want to, solve for a better life for themselves, their families, those people around them. What differs is their context and the capabilities and capacity, right? But at the same time, everyone does fundamentally believe and recognize the fact that technology, if delivered properly, packaged properly, can actually solve for their uplift or growth. What they don't have is the how or the wherewithal to do sort of solve for this. So we see a massive gap where you've got all of these sort of developing or emerging economies globally, and all of these businesses have many, many, many millions of small businesses that haven't really been able to find technology solutions to solve a lot of what plagues their business or is preventing their growth. Whether it is simply as something as basic accounting, inventory management, we might call it CRM, they may call it an address book. We can call it ERP, they call it basically a kata. Things like that. And can we really solve for repackaging a lot of what we consider to be enterprise tech, ERP, CRM, BI, digital marketing, all of that? And can we really repackage that in a way that's much more accessible for small business in our markets? And that's what we're trying to do. We're in the picks and shovels business.
How do the numbers look like right now? Like how much have you been able to how many businesses have you been able to get onboarded, as well as I want to know, why are you solving this problem? Like, if you could be working on something else, you would be doing it, but I'm sure you probably decided that this is something worth doing. Why would you venture out to do something helping businesses, getting online? Why this problem?
So two things. I sort of fundamentally believe in the power of technology to uplift businesses and individuals. As someone who sort of spent his entire life working with technology for large enterprise, et cetera, you realize what large enterprise is trying to do is the exact same thing as small business, except large enterprise, they have IT departments and consultants and budgets, et cetera, and whatnot. But the aspiration is the same. QuickBooks, QuickTax, HubSpot, all of these things were a revolution for small business when they came out, in the early 90s and the 2000s. But where are the equivalents for our markets, right? The ones that are really tailored for the needs and capacities here. Not every small business has access to a laptop. Not every small business has the capability of operating a experience like that. But 99% of small business owners in Pakistan can probably use WhatsApp. So where's the WhatsApp equivalent of small business tools? And I'm very, very passionate about the fact that I believe that for markets like Pakistan, our ability to survive and thrive in a global market is dependent on our ability to really leverage technology for our benefit. And we need to build those key skills that'll unlock growth for this economy. And a lot of that is anchored in things like e-commerce. They're anchored in things like customer service and analytics. And unless we start figuring out how to arm our sort of entrepreneurs with these requisite skills, we're as a country or as a region or as a group of countries, they're not going to be able to progress and compete in the modern world. So that's where the passion comes from. In terms of where we stand today, we continue to work on the product, but we've steadily been sort of adding more and more sellers. We've got about 30,000 merchants on our platform today, just in Pakistan. We're in the process of opening a couple of markets in Africa and one in Southeast Asia as well, through sort of partners. And we're not too rushed to scale right now. We understand there's a market readiness issue. And what we're really focused on is creating a really sticky user experience that delights. And, everyone asks me, what is it that you're trying to build, et cetera? And my answer to them is always, I'm trying to build a set of tools and experiences that really, really delight our sellers or our entrepreneurs. And that's something they should be happy paying for because it is unlocking value and efficiency for them. And that's really what we're doing.
Okay, so the pricing works is like they just pay a flat fee to you, and that's pretty much it. And then it's up to them how many orders they get. Like there's no transaction, for example, actually, there's no commission on transactions.
We are completely commission free because we fundamentally believe that commissions have no place in e-commerce, at least in emerging markets. What we're sort of doing is flipping the model on the head. So yes, we will have monthly recurring fees, but we'll always have a free tier where in that free tier, you can sort of transact for a flat fee per transaction. And it costs you nothing to keep your store up and running. And I think that's one of the key things you have to understand in this market. There's a lack of understanding. And that lack of understanding leads to a lot of risk averseness, which is why so many businesses today, even despite having the capability and capacity and maybe even the financial capability, are still offline today. So how do you remove that friction and how do you de-risk the proposition of going online? And for us, the solution was to rethink the pricing model in a way where it brings risk down to zero.
Okay. So I know you're talking about offline businesses going online. Have you had any instances where there's a new business, a brand new business, they don't have an offline presence, but they want to have online presence? Is that something you're seeing?
Absolutely. So I think we power, or we're fortunate to power a lot of virtual businesses that have zero offline presence. So these are people who are working from home, selling homemade goods. They're dark kitchens, restaurants that are entirely running on the platform that have no official storefront, but sort of operate out of nondescript buildings, and they're sort of running their entire building or their entire business on our platform. So again, the goal is if you have something to sell, regardless of what it is, we're the easiest path to allow you to do so. Because what we really do is we've demystified and simplified the process to the point where it's download an app, fill out some information, and within a few minutes, you can be ready to accept digital payments and start shipping using, any of our logistics partners like Bikea or PandaGo or any of the courier companies. And it's all so easy and intuitive that there's no reason really not to do it. And I think what we're seeing and what's very, very encouraging for us is we're sort of hitting that point where we're seeing use cases for the business or the tool that we didn't even anticipate. So we now have wholesalers, for example, using our platform to service their downstream retailers and order taking there. I mean, we didn't really think this was going to happen anytime soon, but we're beginning to see that, right? And we're seeing folks like virtual tutors who teach things like Quran and sort of mathematics. They're using our platform to collect their fees and subscriptions. So it's fantastic to see a lot of these sort of verticals sort of spin up by themselves. And, then we sort of focus on building specific solution sets for them.
Wow, that's really interesting. So how many people does it take to run an operation like yours?
Yeah, we have at Brandverse, which is sort of our parent company, where we have which sort of the uh, where Chikoo is incubated right now. We have a total of about 135 people. A lot of that is on the content side, where one of our secret sauces within the app is we actually are the curators and creators of the largest database of standardized product content in Pakistan. So what happens is if it's, let's say, a can of Pepsi or a box of tissue paper that you're selling, we already have all of that content in our database. And in order to add that to your store, all you need to do is scan the barcode using your camera, and we make that magic happen. And for that, we've got a large production team. But on the engineering side, we're about we scaled our engineering to about 25 engineers, and we have about the same on the marketing, sales, and other functions.
Are you having hard time recruiting talent? Because that's one thing that I've been hearing a lot, that it's really difficult to find good people, and once you find them, it's very difficult to retain them.
I agree with the first part. It's a very difficult talent market. I think the influx of startups, the growth of the outsourcing or offshore body shopping business has put a severe strain on the amount of resources we have. We have multiple startups in Pakistan who, as a result, are outsourcing to markets like Estonia and Vietnam and Thailand because they can't find requisite resources here. It's driven a significant increase in sort of the compensation as well. So that's always been a strain as well. There's definitely a fight on for high quality resources. I think it's difficult to recruit. I don't think it's difficult to retain. A lot of these places are fly by night and they have very poor culture. And I think that's what you have to make sure that you do, which is spend a lot of time with your people, really focus on their personal development, and obviously take care of them, right? So it's the small things, that we were having a conversation the other day with a couple of entrepreneurs that they are software engineers are happily willing to be paid 20 to 25% less as long as where they work is closer to home, and because they don't want to spend 3 hours a day commuting, which makes a lot of sense, right? So you really have to solve for a lot of these things and really look at the problem as a whole. But the challenge persists. It's not going to get any easier. Our solution has been to actually create our own talent. So we hire young and spend time, money, and effort on them, and hope they stick around. And in order to increase the chances of that success, we spend a lot of time and effort individually with our resources and really push them to grow. I think the great thing is we have a very high retention rate, but that's because I think the problem is compelling, and the product is fun, and the culture is great. And that's something from day one we've been very, very protective of.
So you mentioned culture. What does it take? What kind of culture are we talking about?
So my experience around building high performance teams or being a part of a high performance team comes from Google. I spent the better part of 5 years as a part of the sales teams there, and I think a culture of openness is key. A culture where I think the mission is very, very compelling, and everyone is aligned to sort of achieve that is key. A culture of respect, whether it's differences, similarities, nuances, that's sort of key. I like to think that we like to keep it light as far as our workspace goes. But at the same time, we're very, very protective and cognizant of it. And I think culture takes effort, right? You have to, it's not just something you write on a wall or on a blog and forget about it. It's something that you have to constantly work on, right? And that means that, and it's not the HR department's job. So I think culture is something that the management team or the leadership team drives, and whether that's how you spend time, how you address people, how is your open door policy really open door policy? All of these things matter. So I think it comes down to what you do and how well you do it and how often you do it. And I think the reality is that it has to be a part of one of the leadership team's JD. Whilst it's a shared responsibility, someone has to own the culture aspect of an organization, and it needs to be top down.
You have a keen eye on like the fintech scene in Pakistan. That's probably most likely because of you're working in e-commerce and you deal with the payments issue all the time. Like, what is the biggest challenge that you see right now that even though it is a challenge, it could be solved if there was some sort of a will behind it? Like, okay, we need to solve this. What is that one challenge that you feel that could be easily solved tomorrow, but it's not being solved?
There are three challenges, and one of which is related to the other in payments. And sort of my perspective comes from working with a lot of these fintechs in my previous sort of engagement. Second, it comes from having founded a fintech myself, which is one of the largest billing aggregators in Pakistan. And third is in my current role where I'm sort of dealing with all of these guys, trying to get things to work. So the number one biggest issue is merchant onboarding, right? It is a painful, arduous process. It needs to be simplified and made easier, uncomplicated and paperless, so that many more merchants who are selling online, and I'm not just talking about the Kadis or the Al-Karams or whatever. I'm talking about that small retailer or that at-home entrepreneur can start accepting digital payments. In order to do that, we need to rationalize the onboarding policies as well as simplify some of the KYC requirements, which right now are too onerous. Which leads me to my second point. If you've ever dealt with a bank in Pakistan or any sort of financial service provider, you realize there's a tremendous amount of paperwork. But the most frustrating part of that paperwork is usually it's the same piece of information that's being repeated and offered up or requested over and over and over again in various different forms. I think the SCCP, the State Bank, the Federal Bureau of Revenue, the provincial boards, they need to come together to solve for single KYC or central KYC. There is no reason why information needs to be siloed and repeated over and over again in the age that we live in. This would also simplify the previous challenge of merchant onboarding, where if there is a central repository for commercial information or organization information, I shouldn't have to have everything signed, and I shouldn't have to share my articles of incorporation and my MOA and board resolutions, etc. It should be a much more simplified process. The third and more challenging thing, which I don't think we have a solution for today, is that the economics of digital payments is troublesome in Pakistan. The two challenges. One, we have this emerging platform called Raza, which completely destroys the economics of payments, right? And it's saying we're going to do everything for free, and there's not going to be any MDR, there are not going to be any fees, and we're going to do P2M, we're going to do P2P, all of this sort of stuff, which is great. But then what do the other guys do, right? The guys who've been working on this for the last 15, 20 years, what happens to their business models? And I think that's a big question mark, right? No one has that answer. That being said, the other challenge is that the current prevailing economics, the 2.5%, 3%, 3.5%, all of that, it's not actually necessarily palatable to a broad spectrum of retailers, where one of the challenges is that their operating margins are just too sort of small to justify paying 2.5 or 3%. So if they were to pay 2.5 or 3%, they might actually be making no money or actually losing money. And this is certainly the case when you start pushing payments together with tax compliance and documentation. So there needs to be some delineation there, so that maybe you proliferate digital payments first and then sort of jump on to other things.
So basically, merchant onboarding, know your customer, ease of making sure that you know your customer, plus like having more incentives and cost structure for payment processing. So it's funny you mentioned that the 2% 3% transaction fee, because here if I go to a Desi store, and most of the time the Desi store will have this sign in the front. It would say if it's less than $10, I'm going to charge you like a 50-cent charge on the card, which doesn't make sense. No one else does that. Only Desi stores do it. So that's always like an incentive, like to pay them cash if it's like less than a certain amount. So that it would get to that point where merchants are not going to accept it, or if they do accept it, they'll have like a minimum transaction fee or transaction charge.
That exists in Pakistan today, right? Where retailers might have a POS device, but the minute you ask to pay via card, then they'll say, okay, look, it's going to cost you 2.5% extra because I can't afford it and I'm not going to take that hit for your convenience. So either pay me in cash, pay me via check, anything but a credit card or a debit card. In fact, most people will even say, just transfer the funds into my account. That's fine as well. I just don't want to pay the 2.5%. And, that's an issue that I think the schemes have to solve for, because I understand the value that they bring, and I understand that there's a cost to the infrastructure that's being thing. There's a cost to the plastic that's circulating around in the economy, but it's just, it doesn't sit well within the retail segment, and unfortunately, that's why we haven't made massive progress with it. I think the other thing, to be honest, is that there's got to be another way to make money from payments than just the MDR, right? Whether you become a data play or insights or analytics play, whatever it is, you can't solely just be an MDR focused play. And I think there's an evolution of the business model that's required there. And I think it was interesting. I think MasterCard is probably the furthest ahead in that race, where I think globally, most of their revenue now comes from, the overwhelming majority of their revenue comes from consulting, not from core payments. So that's where we're headed.
You mentioned MDR. What does that stand for? I'm not familiar with the term.
Merchant discount rate. That's the 2.5% that merchants have to pay, or the 3% or whatever they have to pay every time they swipe the card.
So which one of the new sort of neobanks that are coming out in Pakistan, like I keep saying Sada Pay, it's Sada Pay and Naya Pay. So a tag, there's tag too. So which one of these are like trying to solve for that problem, or is it mostly like a B2C play?
So right now, I don't think any of these banks or sort of EMIs are currently focused on the merchant piece, although I do know NayaPay is working on it, and they'll probably be the first out to market there. But I don't think the other EMIs have really started scratching the surface. I do think in terms of early feedback, it looks very clear that NayaPay has a very compelling product, as does SadaPay. I think you have to give it up to NayaPay for just sort of putting their head down, very low hype, and just executing very, very well. And they've done that, and I think that, they're well positioned to probably take a lead in the space if the momentum continues.
So let's just zoom out a little bit and like talk about the startup ecosystem in general. Like, how do you feel? Like, I'm pretty sure I've been following the ecosystem for quite some time now. Past 5 years, a lot has changed, and especially within the past 2 years, a lot has changed. What do you think is like the biggest, change that you see in startups, as well as like the culture? Where do you think things are going?
So I think it's a great time to start found a startup in Pakistan. I don't think money's been ever been easier. I mean, right now it feels like, as long as you have a little bit of credibility and are able to articulate yourself well, you can pretty much raise money at will. At
as
least
long as you have a pulse.
7 figures. Yeah. it's a great time, and there was a time when we were still wondering who would write $50,000 checks, and it's great to see how quickly things have come along. I think the contribution there are a lot of people who contributed towards accelerating this piece, and kudos to them. Won't get into sort of naming them, but it's a very long list. Where are we headed? I think I would very much like to see Pakistan, a lot of Pakistani startups now building for the region, if not globally, as opposed to just focusing on Pakistan. Pakistan's going to go through a little bit of an economic rough patch over the next couple of years. I mean, we've been over the last year and a half or so. That's probably likely to continue. Severity might actually increase. So it'd be great to see Pakistan out startups, right? So based in Pakistan, building for the region. I think we're also going to see some sort of correction in Pakistan in terms of valuations. Because, it's one thing to raise money, it's another thing to build a business. Raising money is easier than building the actual business. And the realities on Pakistan are difficult. And, my one concern about the industry as a whole is the quality of due diligence that's being done on a lot of these deals. I'm hoping that with many more VCs and now with COVID sort of settling down, there's going to be much greater due diligence done on a lot of these numbers. And as a result, we'll be seeing much higher quality startups. I'm not saying that you can't invest money in an early stage startup with early signs of traction. I'm just saying that some of these valuations and some of these businesses, I don't think people have really looked past the deck. And that's scary, because what you don't want to do is we don't want Pakistan's moment to just be 8 months. We want it to be much, much longer, and we want there to be sustained investment in this ecosystem. So I hope that everyone that's raised money over the last year and a half is able to deliver on it, because that's what it really is. It's an obligation, not an achievement, to raise money, right? So you have to deliver something behind it. So
yeah. Do you think the right kinds of problems are being solved?
I think there's a lot of trend-based sort of startups being founded. Quick commerce feels very, very buzzy. Cloud kitchens feel very, very buzzy. And there may be problems that they're solving, and those may be very real, tangible problems. I'm just telling you my perspective. It just feels that I keep telling people that just because something works in India or just because something works in the Middle East doesn't mean it's necessarily going to work in Pakistan. The economics of labor, the economics, operating economics and landscape are very, very different here. Just because BNPL works very successfully digitally in the US doesn't mean it's going to work here in Pakistan, because we have all sorts of issues with enforcement and credit ratings and worthiness, etc. So
BNPL is in a lot of trouble even in the US now. So yeah, I wonder how things will be like within like a year's time in Pakistan, because if, let's just say, the economy does not do as well, and I just don't know how BNPL will survive basically in Pakistan, because I think I was reading up on KistPay, like they don't even have any checks in terms of who the person is, except for the phone number, right? So how much information can you get from a phone number?
Not much. And I think if you're a betting man, now's the time to go buy a very large TV on KistPay and let's see if they got or BNPL. I think look, you have to understand the readiness of the market, and you have to look past just the 220 million population number. The reality is there are many challenges, infrastructural and otherwise, that need to be sort of addressed. That being said, I think one of the things that I would really like to see is an indigenous approach to solving a lot of the problems that exist here. It's not just cookie cutter duplicating what's already exists somewhere else and just photocopying it into Pakistan, because that rarely ever works, right? What you need to do is really look at it from a local indigenous lens and solve from there. And I think when you do that, that's when you're truly solving for Pakistan. And there's no reason why we can't innovate ourselves as opposed to simply just copying what others have done. My personal preference for businesses are boring businesses. And I think there are plenty of boring opportunities still in Pakistan. So if you look at what I did previously, which was building a billing aggregator, that's literally the most boring business you could build within this fintech space. And then if you look at Brandverse, it's literally the most boring part of e-commerce, which is literally taking photographs and descriptions and building content around products, storing it in a database and exposing it via an API. It is literally the most boring business. But I think there's so many of those boring businesses that can scale, and infrastructure businesses are great in that sense, right? And my favorite saying is, I want to be in the tar business. Everyone says they want to build the rails. Everyone says they want to build the towers and the pipelines, but underneath all of that is a road. And underneath the road, and what that road is made out of, is a tar business. And there's one tar guy probably in Pakistan who makes billions and billions of dollars, right? And no one's going to come in. He's not worried about competition because he's in the most boring business of them all. It's tar. So be in the tar business.
A lot of investors are chasing the same deals. And every single round that the startup is raising has like multiple investors. Like, I just wish 2 or 3 investors would fund a startup, and the rest of the startups could be funded by other investors that are also funding that same startup. So I think that's kind of like a chain thing that's going on, which I really hope breaks, because I mean, you really don't need 10 investors to give you $3 million. I mean, like, how many, why would you want that? But I guess if it's a local investor, they want a foreign investor to lead because it gives them more legitimacy and helps them raise further rounds going forward. So I think there's a lot of that going on. So personally, I feel like a lot more startups could be funded if investors were to just take more chances and not be like, hey, I'm making an investment, but I'm not going to lead it. I'm going to have someone else lead from the outside. So the deal looks legit.
I don't think it's as simple as what a local investor wants versus what a foreign investor wants. Pakistan's still a nascent market. We haven't really seen any exits. So whilst there's a great deal of interest because it's a hot market, people are still very cautious. And the way to de-risk it is to have many more people putting the money in and you having a smaller chunk. I think the fact that a lot of investors double down on the subsequent rounds, it's a good sign in the sense that the startups they're investing in are delivering as per expectation, and they're doubling down on the opportunity. That being said, should startups have cap table or sort of rounds where they've got 10, 12, 15 investors still in this day and age? I don't really know why that would be the case. That would suggest that there's just a lot of doubt over that particular startup. But I think we're seeing tier 1 investments come in or from VCs, and they're willing to write entire checks now, right? So, or take up entire rounds, which is also very encouraging. But I think you need a balance, right? You do need the legitimacy that foreign institutional investors bring, but also some of the street smart savvy connections that your local investors will also bring, because God knows you've run into all sorts of challenges and problems when you're building a business in Pakistan.
I mean, as far as foreign investors are concerned, they have people on the ground doing due diligence. So I guess that's in a way works out for everyone. But I personally would want to see a lot more seed and pre-seed checks, small time, $100,000, maybe $250,000 checks going to startups instead of these $1 million pre-seed rounds where Tiger or someone else with like you said, tier 1 is coming in at that stage. It's pre-seed seed is that's not they should be doing, but that shows that there's not much activity in terms of angel investments at that level, or where you would see that kind of activity.
You're right in the sense that there isn't much real pre-seed or angel investment happening, and I think that'll happen over a period of time. Usually, it's local investors who lead that. Unfortunately, I think the economic conditions in the country are going to make that a little difficult.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of deals were announced in April, but I'm pretty sure those deals were penned down back in January, February. They were just being strategically announced in April because they were able to do everything, all the paperwork was completed maybe by then. So that's also going to be something interesting to see. Like, there's going to be 1 year of turmoil, maybe in elections next year, maybe not. Who knows? But yeah. Thank you for being on the Misaal podcast. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Misaal podcast. I hope you enjoyed the podcast and will thank me by writing a review or sharing it on social media. Make sure you follow and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Thanks again. See you soon.